Alright, so this is the new Samsung Galaxy Watch Ultra, their new premium outdoor-focused smartwatch with things like a super rugged titanium case, it has a sapphire lens, it has very decent battery life, as well as tons of sports and fitness features. So the Galaxy Watch Ultra takes a bit of a departure from their last more pro-level watch, that being the Watch 5 Pro. They may have actually skipped over doing a 6 Pro to put all their work into the Ultra because this is a far cry from that watch from a design standpoint, a feature standpoint, and maybe most importantly, an accuracy standpoint. And I'll come straight out of the gate and say that this is the most accurate Samsung watch I've ever tested. Is it perfect? Not quite, but I do have to say that I'm pretty pleased with the results overall. More details on that here in just one bit. So I've been using the Galaxy Watch Ultra for the last couple weeks now, putting it through tons of workouts from cycling to running to weight training. And in this video, I want to give my overall thoughts on the day-to-day health tracking, the fitness tracking, the battery life, and just what I really think of Samsung's new flagship watch and if it delivers. And if you do find the information in this video to be useful, just do me a quick favor and hit that like button down below. Oh, and by the way, you may see a little bit of flickering or banding on some of the clips in this video, but that's just the frame rate on my camera not matching the refresh rate on the watch. You don't see that in real life. So when it comes to the design, well, it's kind of interesting where they sort of brought back the squared off circular design of their Gear Sport from way back in the day, where it's kind of a combination of a squircle along with a round bezel on top. But this time it's just basically this like kind of super beefy and super premium version. It has a 47mm case and it's 12.1mm thick. So this isn't necessarily a small watch. And for my 185mm circumference wrist, it's right around the largest that I would prefer, but it's been totally comfortable for me. And then for the construction, it's made out of titanium. It has a sapphire lens for increased scratch resistance, and it also has a 10 ATM water resistance rating. So in terms of durability, this should be very similar to other high-end sports-focused watches. And then when it comes to options, so the Ultra comes in 3 different options when it comes to the case color, with a titanium white version, a titanium gray version, as well as a titanium silver version, which is the one I'm rocking right here. And then they also have plenty of band options where they have a marine band, a trail band, as well as a peak form band. Now, when it comes to the trail band that I've been using, this is a fantastic band for the most part. It's super comfortable, there's lots of stretch to it, it dries out quickly after a workout or a shower. It's pretty darn nice, but the complaint I have is actually about how you adjust it, where you have to remove this pin to adjust the fit. And this is where it's just not so great when it comes to switching from daily wear to a workout, where you generally want a bit more snug fit on your watch for workouts for the most accurate heart rate, and then you probably want to have it a little bit looser throughout the day. But this sort of mechanism doesn't necessarily make it really quick and easy to adjust. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan of this watch strap, though. It's just that I think that they kind of over-engineered this little adjustment system. Now, for the display, so this is a pretty incredible 1.5-inch AMOLED display with 480 by 480 pixels that just really pops, especially since it can get to a peak brightness of 3000 nits. That is a lot of nits, and I had zero issues seeing it in pretty much any condition, whether that's inside or outside, even in the brightest conditions. And then on the flip side, when it's dark, the display also does have a red mode at night with certain watch faces, which is kind of just easier on the eyes and helps not screw up your circadian rhythm. And then to get around the device, it has a touchscreen that also has a digital rotating bezel on the inside edge, along with 3 physical buttons on the right. However, it doesn't have the physical rotating bezel like some of their classic versions of the past. The touchscreen and digital bezel work just like before, but the button configuration here is a little bit different, where they now have a new quick button on the right, in addition to the home button as well as the back button. Now, one could definitely argue that the quick button takes the inspiration from the Apple Watch Ultra's action button, but really, at the end of the day, it is just adding another physical button. And in my opinion, that's a great thing, especially when it comes to sports and fitness, where physical buttons are just easier to use than a touchscreen. The touchscreen is fine when your hands are dry, but when there's moisture on the screen, like if your hands are sweaty or just after a shower or something like that, who knows how it's going to react. And that's where it's just handy to have more buttons to do things in those sort of scenarios. Now, in terms of what you actually can do with Samsung's quick button, so you can customize this to do a few different functions, like opening up a list of workout profiles. You can just start a specific workout. You can bring up a stopwatch, turn on the flashlight, as well as enable the water lock feature for the display, or you can just go ahead and disable it if you'd like. And then in addition to that, it also serves other functions like being able to pause and resume workouts, and that definitely is very awesome versus having to use a touchscreen. And then you can also long press it to bring up the new siren, which, by the way, is pretty darn loud. And again, one could very well make the comparison to Apple's action button, especially when it comes to the siren feature. However, one thing I do love about Samsung's quick button is that I don't accidentally press it like I pretty much always do with the action button on the Apple Watch Ultra. This Galaxy version has these guards next to the button where it doesn't get accidentally pressed. Oh, and then one last thing is that although this quick button actually does spin, that doesn't actually do anything. And then they also have some customizable actions for double pressing and holding the home button for different functions, as well as customizing the back button, but for some reason, not as much customizability for the back button. And then along with all that, so Samsung also has the double pinch gesture, which is actually turned off by default, but with this, they allow you to dismiss notifications, take a photo when paired to your phone, as well as silence alarms. And then on the smartwatch side of things, so the Ultra and the Watch 7 are the first watches to be running Wear OS 5, and they also have a new processor, which is supposed to be 30% more efficient than previous generations. And then putting that all together with the 590 milliamp hour battery on the Ultra, that should lead to much better battery life than previous generations. Now, getting around the device is just as quick as before, and no complaints there, but it's really been the battery life that has kind of been the struggle with Wear OS devices, and the Ultra ups these numbers quite a bit. So they advertise that you can get up to 4 days in their day-to-day power saving mode, and then up to 40 hours of use in their exercise power saving mode. Now, if you're buying a watch like this, and if you're anything like me, you'll probably want to turn on a lot, if not like all the features, versus having it in a power saving mode, which turns some of those features off. So for my testing, I was using the always on display. I had sleep tracking enabled, along with blood oxygen saturation tracking, as well as skin temperature tracking, recording plenty of workouts, of course, all that good stuff. And it's been consistently getting 2.5 to 3 days out of it. And actually on one occasion, it came so close to actually hitting that 3-day mark, even with like 4 hours of outdoor workouts in there. So for turning nearly everything on and even doing lots of outdoor activities, 2.5 to 3 days is really solid here, folks, for a Wear OS device. Now, when it comes specifically to battery life for recording outdoor workouts, so on this right here, I started out at 86%, and then at the end of a 2-hour and 15-minute ride, it has 75% remaining, using around 4.89% per hour, meaning that you could potentially get up to 20 hours or so out of it for one continuous outdoor activity. And then on this right here, it used about 6.4% per hour, which is around 15 hours or so, and then on this right here, about 6% per hour. So let's just say anywhere from 15 to 20 hours, which is, again, pretty darn good for a Wear OS watch. Now, if you are using the routing feature for navigation, I did find this to take quite a hit on battery life, which is the same for all watches, by the way, but on this right here, it used about 11% per hour. So just keep that in mind if you're using a route. Now, what's interesting though is if you're using the Strava app to record your workout, where I was actually getting a bit better battery life here than the native workout app, where it was using around 4.44% per hour on this ride, and then a little bit under 4% on this ride. So using the native workout app seems to consume a little bit more power than the Strava app. So kind of interesting. Now, one change though when it comes to the battery and the charging is that the Ultra doesn't have the wireless power share feature where you could place your watch on the back of a compatible phone where the phone could actually charge the watch. It's just something they couldn't actually build into the Watch 7 or the Ultra due to a new heart rate sensor in the back, which we'll talk about here in just one bit. And then on the health and activity tracking side of things, so the Ultra can track your steps, your heart rate 24 hours a day, your calories burned, it has sleep tracking, there's SpO2 tracking, there's skin temperature tracking at night, as well as snoring tracking with a compatible phone next to your bed. The Ultra does also have an FDA-cleared sleep apnea tracking feature as well as an ECG feature. However, both those features require a compatible Samsung phone. I'm using mine with a Google Pixel, so I can't test those features, unfortunately, but it is definitely something to be aware of if you are interested in this watch and you don't have a Samsung phone. Now, when it comes to sleep tracking, so the Ultra gives you a sleep score every morning with a breakdown of different sleep factors that contributed to that score. And then it also gives you your sleep stages, and you can optionally also track your blood oxygen saturation level as well as your skin temperature. And then if you have a compatible phone, you can also track snoring if you have your phone beside your bed. And in terms of accuracy, well, I generally don't get into the weeds when it comes to sleep stages, but when it comes to the time I went to bed, the time I woke up, as well as time I spent awake during the night, those always were pretty accurate. But when it comes to the sleep score and how that lines up with how I actually felt in the morning, well, it trends well in the sense that on a bad night, it had me at like a 69, and then on the good end, it had me at like an 88. But on that night that I had a 69, well, I woke up feeling like garbage, where I felt like more like a 40 or 50. So while I feel like the trends line up well, I feel like it's a little bit capped on either end, where I would expect kind of a broader range, if that makes sense. And that's actually a great segue into their new energy score feature. So energy score gives you a rating in the morning of your energy level for the day, or kind of like a readiness score of your body's battery level in the morning. And this score is based on your sleep quality, sleeping heart rate, HRV, skin temperature, breathing rate, as well as your previous day's activity. Now, just like the sleep score, I'd say that the trends line up well, but again, it seems a little bit capped on either end, where at the lowest it had me at a 61, and at the highest it had me around an 82. So in my mind, there were mornings where I felt like I was like a 30 or 40 due to terrible sleep, and then other mornings where I felt like I was 100%. So when it comes to the actual usefulness, again, I think it can be a good indication in terms of the trends, but I didn't necessarily find the range to be as broad as I would have expected. But probably the most important thing to note is that this is a one-time score in the morning. So this is kind of like Whoop's recovery score or Oura's readiness score. It's not a dynamic energy level throughout the day that changes, like let's say Garmin's battery. So that's where I'd love to see this score kind of change throughout the day based on your activity. Oh, and then one more thing to mention is that in regards to HRV or heart rate variability, so all devices can measure this a little bit differently. So the number that Samsung may give you here may not be exactly the same number as an Oura Ring, a Whoop, or a Garmin. The most important thing are that the trends line up, and I did find the trends line up for the most part with my other devices. The Ultra also comes with this new beta/labs feature called an AGES Index. So the AGES Index is supposed to give you an indication of your overall metabolic health, which can be influenced by your diet and lifestyle, and they come up with this number by measuring advanced glycogen end products. That's where they get the AGES acronym. So these are supposedly compounds that develop naturally in the body when protein and fat are oxidized by sugar. That's what the app tells me, at least. It definitely sounds like a cool feature and all, but I don't really know how to actually interpret this data. So mine just tells me that I'm in a medium to high range, whatever that means, and mine hasn't changed in the last couple weeks that I've been wearing it. So at the moment, I don't really know how to use this feature, but I'll keep on using this feature as I test the Watch 7, and I'll maybe have a little bit more information when I publish that review. When it comes to sport profiles and what kinds of activities that you can track, so there's quite a few to choose from here with all the common stuff like running and cycling. There's also outdoor recreation profiles like hiking. There's pool swimming as well as open water swimming. There's multi-sport and triathlon modes, and there's a ton of gym-based profiles as well. The gym-based profiles are kind of interesting here though, where it's not that they just have weight training or circuit training profiles, which they do. They also have a bunch of these very specific workout profiles for stuff like arm curls as well as deadlifts, where they can actually count your reps. And then you also do have the ability to customize data fields within sport profiles, where you can have a custom data page with up to 7 data fields on that page. The Ultra also comes with a feature where you can race against previous outdoor runs as well as rides, and this is very similar to Apple's Race Route feature. So you'll access these by going into the settings on a run or a ride, and then there's this little race button down below here. Now for a route to actually show up here, you'll need to have done the exact same route at least twice from what I found, and once you have, they'll show up here with frequent routes as well as recent routes. Do notice though that you've actually had to do one of these routes in the last 14 days, and you actually have to be within around 130 feet or so of the start of that route for it to show up here. And then when you tap on one of these routes, it'll show a map along with the best time that you've achieved for that route, along with the total distance as well as the pace. And then once you tap start and actually get going, it'll let you know if you're ahead or behind your best time with both on-screen prompts as well as audible alerts. Now this could definitely be a handy feature, but there's 2 big things I'd really like to see with it. So since this is based on a previous route, I would actually love to have turn-by-turn instructions of that route, since it is a specific route that you have to take for this feature. But the other thing though is that it doesn't give you any indication of how far you are from the finish. You just kind of have to remember exactly where the finish was on that route. So having some sort of like distance countdown to the finish line would be incredibly helpful in making sure that you can actually finish strong. Oh, and then lastly, I'm not really sure why it has to be within the last 14 days for a route to show up there. I can definitely understand the proximity thing, but I don't know why it doesn't just show all repeated routes of all time. The only thing I'd say right now though is that I'd have to imagine that nearly anyone that owns a power meter also has some sort of device or app that's already capable of calculating FTP automatically, or it has a threshold test built in. It's kind of like one of those, I really think they didn't necessarily need to put the work into something like this, but hey, I guess it is there apparently. And then the Ultra also comes with the same routing features that came alongside the Watch 5 Pro, where you can load in a GPX route through the app, which you can use for turn-by-turn navigation. It's not quite as streamlined as some other apps out there like a Garmin, where it actually sync routes directly from Strava, where you actually have to kind of get the GPX route file into the Samsung Health app, but it's not like super overcomplicated by any means either. Anyhow, once you have your route file loaded up and synced with your watch, you'll get turn-by-turn instructions, and that's not only visual cues, but also audible cues. Now, the Ultra doesn't have offline maps though, so if you don't have your phone with you, it'll be a breadcrumb style route that will show you your intended path, but there isn't any context like images of streets or trails or anything like that. However, if you do bring your phone with you, the watch can then pull in map information that you can then see on your watch. Now on to accuracy. So on the GPS side of things, so the Ultra has a dual frequency or dual band satellite chipset, meaning that the Ultra can not only access different satellite systems like GPS, Galileo, and Beidou, but also can access different frequencies within those systems. And the aim with this kind of technology is to increase accuracy in environments where satellite signals can actually bounce off objects like, let's say, heavy tree cover, tall buildings, as well as canyon walls. Now, just because a watch does have this sort of technology, though, it doesn't necessarily make it automatically more accurate. There's also a lot of other factors like the antenna design. But for how the Ultra actually did, well, it does pretty well from all the testing that I've been doing, where it's actually matching up pretty well in terms of the total distance between lots of devices on numerous rides and runs, but it's also laying down some pretty decent tracks for the most part. It's very solid in all the stretch sections where it stays nice and true and never really wavers. And then on the majority of corners, it also does a good job as well, staying tight and representing the actual path that I was on. However, on some higher speed corners, I did find that it has a tendency of overshooting some of those where it's not quite as tight as some of those other devices with the same kind of technology. I didn't necessarily notice that overshooting with slower speed activities like running, like on this run here, where all the crazy corners I was taking were totally fine. It was just the higher speed turns with cycling where I saw it overshoot. And that's actually where that slight discrepancy in some of the total distances may have been coming from. But overall though, I think GPS accuracy is totally fine. It's not necessarily to the highest level of some of the other devices out there, but it's good to go. But the thing I did really want to mention is that it does get a GPS fix quickly when starting workout. That was kind of a historic problem I've had with Galaxy watches in the past, where it could sometimes take like minutes to get a GPS fix when I started a workout. With the Ultra, it happens within like 3 to 10 seconds at most, so I'm so happy that problem's been fixed. Oh, and then really quick before we get to heart rate accuracy is that the elevation gain tracked using its built-in altimeter is pretty good here as well, where it almost always lined up well with other devices as well as Strava's corrected elevation data. However, there was this one ride where it did overreport a bit, but that was the only ride where I actually saw anything was off with the altimeter. Alright, so when it comes to heart rate accuracy, so the Ultra has a new updated heart rate sensor versus the previous generation. Now this, including GPS accuracy as well as acquisition, is another area where Samsung has really struggled in the past. The 6 was definitely better than what I've seen before, but it was still kind of hard to recommend. But that story has changed a little bit with the Ultra. Actually, it's changed a lot. However, the Ultra does also have a slight disadvantage here where it's a larger and heavier watch, which can make the watch bounce around with some activities, which could lead to some inaccuracies. So in all the following examples, I'll have the Ultra highlighted in orange, and then I'll be comparing it to both a chest heart rate strap as well as some optical arm heart rate straps as references. So starting out with some indoor cycling, this is what I usually do to get a baseline on accuracy, since this is one of the easiest kinds of workouts for these kinds of sensors to get right. There's very little arm movement, you're not really gripping all that much either, which tenses up your wrist, and there's really no external outside variables. Any decent sensor should do a good job here, and the Ultra did pretty well. The only portions in the ride where I really saw anything funky were right here at the beginning with a bit of a blip, and then it was a little bit slow to pick up the decrease in heart rate right here, but overall, this is a great result. Now, moving on to some intervals, again, pretty decent. For the warm-up section here, that's basically perfect. Right here is where I actually stopped pedaling for a bit because I had to take a quick phone call, but it did waver a little bit down there, but I'm not overly too concerned about that. But for the actual intervals, that's pretty darn good. A little bit of a blip here and a little bit of a blip here, but overall I tracked these intervals really well, and I'd also add that it was also quite responsive to the quick changes in heart rate. Okay, so that was indoor cycling, but now let's take it outside, and this is where you start to introduce a lot more variables like gripping onto the handlebars, as well as a lot of vibrations and bumps on the road, which can make a watch bounce around to the wrist. And this is where you will start to see more inaccuracies from any watch, so let's see how the Ultra handles it. So on this first ride here, that's some pretty good stuff, and I'd actually call it some great stuff out of the Ultra. However, then on this ride here, not quite as awesome, but I do kind of have to give credit where credit is due, where this is again far and away better than previous generation Samsung watches. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a lot better. But I have to say though, unlike Samsung watches of the past, the Ultra actually does recover quickly from those spots where it does wander off. With previous generation watches, if it did wander off, it took a while, and I mean a while before getting it locked back onto heart rate. And I'll just go ahead and quickly go through a few more examples here where I did see similar things from the Ultra for cycling. Overall, pretty decent results, but interestingly, on nearly every ride, a spot here or there where it did have a spike for a moment or two. Okay, so moving on to some running. So this is probably where I saw the biggest difference in terms of accuracy versus the previous generation watches, where it's hard for me to actually really complain about these results. These are pretty darn good. A little bit of wavering here and a little bit of a blip here, but that's some pretty good stuff here, folks. And then on this other run, again, nothing really to complain about. and again, much better than previous generational watches. All right, so now moving on to some weight training. So this is kind of the holy grail for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors, just due to this kind of workout where it's kind of a wrist-based optical heart rate sensor's worst nightmare, with tons of varying arm movement, as well as a lot of wrist flexion, which tenses your wrist, both of which these sensors just don't like. It's basically a bonus if the watch can actually get this right. So in this session here, that's pretty decent for this kind of activity. It doesn't quite catch the peaks on some of those sets, but that's still pretty usable data. Now on this next session, this is where I kind of saw some interesting results. So this was kind of a mix of a little warm up on the treadmill right here, then some weights and some functional training in the middle, followed up by some sprints on the treadmill, and then finishing up with some kettlebell swings at the end. And here's where we can see that the Ultra got a little bit fumbled up when I hopped on the treadmill to run, where it encountered what they call a cadence lock, which is an anomaly that happens with optical heart rate sensors where they accidentally lock onto the cadence of your footsteps as heart rate versus your actual heart rate. Now, being that I just don't test something once and then call it a review, I tried it again, but this time I actually switched the workout profiles from the circuit training workout profile I used on that last example to the just more generic other workout profile to see if that made any difference. And folks, that's what I actually like to see here. That's actually phenomenally good for a weight training and high intensity interval session. This session was slightly different, where I started with weights first with bench press, bicep curls, and then some shoulder flies. And then right here, so these are some kettlebell swings, and then I finished up with a handful of sprints on the treadmill. And other than this little blip right here, this is a really good result for weight training. So what I'm thinking is that the algorithm for the circuit training workout profile just may not be accounting for running during that sort of workout. So my gym time usually isn't just weights, where it's kind of a mixed bag of a lot of things, not only weights, but functional training, some HIIT type stuff, as well as tossing in some intervals on the treadmill. And I think a lot of us are doing like hybrid style training nowadays. So if you are not getting accurate results with the circuit training profile or the weight training profile for that matter, just try the generic other workout profile, which may work better for you. But overall, when it comes to heart rate accuracy, this is leaps and bounds better than what I've seen in the past out of Galaxy watches, and I certainly have to give credit where credit is due. It definitely had some wiggles here and there, and then there was also that one session where it had a cadence lock, but for the most part, this is pretty reliable heart rate data out of the Ultra. Now, unfortunately, it still doesn't appear that you can pair an external heart rate strap to the native workout app on the Ultra for the most reliable heart rate. I know there's like a third-party watch face app out there that can do this, but I'm talking about native integration, which these watches really need from the core. I still don't actually understand why, but I think that is a big miss in my opinion. So with that, what do I really think about the Galaxy Watch Ultra? Well, this is really the best Galaxy Watch that I've ever tested. And to be perfectly frank, I've been pretty disappointed in their previous offerings, but this is a watch that I think I can recommend. It's definitely all not unicorns and rainbows, with stuff like the lack of external heart rate support, the sleep score and energy score features being a little bit questionable in terms of their usefulness, as well as some of the features being limited to Samsung phones and not all Android phones. But for build quality, battery life, as well as sports tracking, I'm pretty pleased with this watch. And if you are interested in picking up this watch, so I'll have a link down in the description below where you can check it out. And it is an affiliate link that does help support the channel without costing you anything additional, but it is a way of helping you support content just like this, and I definitely appreciate it. Anyhow, what are your thoughts on the new Samsung Galaxy Watch Ultra? Is this something that you've been looking for if you're an Android phone user? Definitely let us all know down in the comment section down below. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for my full in-depth review of the Watch 7 that's coming up right around the corner. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.